Okay, welcome back. We're talking about digital forensics, page 201. So an affidavit and a search warrant. This is kind of something it's of interest to me. Starts with the first indication of an incident, right? An affidavit is the permission that you need to search and confiscate stuff. And then a search warrant, the judge has to agree to the affidavit, right? That's how this thing works. So there's a digital forensics methodology. Basically talks about some sort of a policy or crime has been done. And then I prepare an affidavit seeking the authorization to do something. And then if it's authorized, then I start collecting evidence, analyzing the evidence, submit the report, and then, archive the thing. Okay, that's how it works. So identifying the issue, acquiring without any authorization. When I'm going in here collecting this evidence, I can't alter the data in any way. I have to take a forensic style backup. And the chain of custody, for example, 10 million years ago, I worked at a hospital. And they basically would subpoena me occasionally because they were asking about a chain of custody of a blood sample. And so they would bring somebody in, let's say a blood alcohol level. And I would draw blood from them. I would, check on the tube that it was, this had the person's name. And, and I would go back to the machine and stick it in the machine and run the blood alcohol. And of course, during the affidavit, they would ask, was there any time that the blood sample was not in your possession? And I'd say, well, yes, I put it in the rack. And then I had another call. I had to go up to the third floor and draw some blood and come back. So was there anybody else who has access to the lab? I say, well, only lab employees with keys. So, those kind of things. And then when was the blood sample in the exact same location that you left it? Yes, and has the machine been calibrated? And when was the last time it was calibrated? They go through this entire thing where you have to have this chain of custody. Every single person it went through. If I handed that to someone else to do, then basically that had to be documented, the whole chain of custody. And then again, analyzing it without altering it. Okay, I can't, when I collect, like I did a forensic data dump on a server, and then it's read-only, for God's sake, don't mess with it. You can do all the analysis you want, but you can't make any changes. Identifying relevant items. So you start with that affidavit or warrant. A thorough description is very helpful. Like, I need all emails to or from user X from January 1st to July 2nd. Very, very specific when you're asking for information. Okay, acquiring the evidence. One more time, it's very important that you don't alter the stuff that you're gathering. So an offline method, power down the system. Do a bit-by-bit extraction, to include empty sectors on the disk. I mean, everything, because some type of malware sometimes writes to empty spots on the disk. Okay, typically save to write once media, like a CD-ROM. You save it to that, and that way darn well no one's messed with it because you can't write back to it. An online method, network tools and online backups and things of that nature. It's not quite as good, but it works. And then other sources, external drives and paper, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So look, this is not a course on this, so I'm going to move on. Page 206, the jury may believe that someone else put that porn on your computer. Right? So it's your job to say there's no other way that porn got on this machine other than by the principal operator. I have logs of every single person who's ever logged into that machine from the beginning of time. It ain't happening. Here are the dates where the porn appeared, and here's who was logged in at that period of time. You're going to have to be specific. By the way, who's allowed to conduct an investigation? It probably ought not be somebody who doesn't have the training, okay? Because, man, an untrained investigator can screw a case up big time, all right? Particularly if you fail on the chain of custody. Okay, so we're back to the disaster recovery, page 206, so the disaster recovery plan. So I have some choices. Restore to a primary site, the site that went down. Recover the assets, acquire replacements, and then reestablish the things, right? So I'm going to need a company credit card to be able to pull this off sometimes. And something even as simple as, I've been here all night and I'm hungry. So I'm going to use the company credit card, to have somebody deliver a breakfast, from McDonald's, right? Because I can't leave and there's nobody else around, that kind of stuff. I can't wait for approvals. Okay, I have to respond. So the common teams associated with, the management team, they need to know. Some sort of a communications team, because you may not be able to use all the facilities. Hardware, software, network, storage, all the, depending on what the problem is, these are the people you might have to talk to. So disaster recovery process, is it an incident or a disaster? And the only real significance is how long it takes to recover. There's no real definition. Disaster implies long time, incident implies short time. That's it. So there's a policy. Of course there's a policy. This course is all about written policies. The purpose and the scope and the roles and responsibilities, resource requirements, training requirements, and then exercise and test. Oh, God, yes. The classification. You could classify a disaster by the amount of damage, like moderate, severe, critical, that kind of thing, or by the rate of occurrence. It's a slow onset thing, or rapid onset. Rapid onset would be a tornado. I mean, I might know that the weather's going to be bad, and I might get maybe 10 minutes notice that there's a tornado in the area, that kind of stuff. I'm not sure what I would do, batten down the hatches. But a slow onset could be something like, that heat exchanger over there is beginning to fail. I mean, we've had lots and lots of problems with it last summer, and so this summer, I think, and maybe it's going to go out, and bam, you kind of sort of know it's going to happen. It's getting worse over and over again. Another example would be, hey, the number of hurricanes that are coming through and hitting the island is increasing. Maybe we ought to do something. Yeah. So the whole thing about, fire and flood and earthquakes and lightning, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all these things, natural disasters, and what their effects could be on you. And how do you defend against Mother Nature? The only answer is distance. And I wish I could show you that map on the how far is far enough, because it overlays, fire and flood and tornadoes and all these things. It overlays all that stuff and comes up with one composite number that tells you, if you are here on this map, the answer is 37 miles, that kind of thing. Planning to recover, a clear delineation of roles and responsibilities. Who is in charge? Yes. An alert roster, of course, with management notification. Priorities. Obviously, human life is number one. Come on. So, if the building's on fire, you don't send your operators in to do a take backup. No, I'm sorry. That's just not done. Documentation, mitigating the impact, and then maybe some alternative implementations that you can do in the meantime. Like, we're going to use paper now, that kind of stuff. Responding to the disaster. So what if a physical building got destroyed by a tornado or a fire or whatever? Okay, where do you meet? I remember, I was in the Boy Scouts, and one of the things they talked about is you should get with your family and say, if there's a disaster and you have to leave the house, like a fire, where do you meet? And so my answer was, we're gonna meet at the mailbox. So everyone knows you don't go to the backyard and wait for your family to show up. You got, same thing here. If you have a fire drill, one of the things they always tell you, everybody has to file out orderly, and then maybe the corner of this parking lot over here, maybe that's your designated area. So here's the craziest thing. Let's say you had a fire and it's in the daytime. And so the firemen come and they're going to say, did everyone get out of the building? And you should be able to look around and go, yeah, that's everybody. But if you're scattered off, if someone said, well, shoot, it's a fire drill, I'm going to go to Denny's and grab a cup of coffee. Well, then now I don't know who's, right? I don't know if there's somebody in the building or not. Okay. And then typically, this is going to trigger the business, continuity plan, right? If there's the building caught on fire. So let's talk about business continuity. What's the difference between a disaster recovery and business continuity? Okay, I mean, you could go back to this little guy here that attempts to explain it, but quite frankly, that's not all that relevant. To tell you the truth, they make a distinction between disaster recovery and business continuity. And I will tell you, yes, they are two separate things, but for God's sake, don't confuse management, okay? So what do I do if the primary site is gone? It got wiped out by a tornado or a fire. What the plan should be practically identical to the disaster recovery plan. Business continuity says, we're going to move operations to this old warehouse that we leased back on 6th Street. Okay, that kind of stuff, right? So you could do the immediate location or an alternate site where the business is restored. And so there's some strategies that we talk about this on page 214. One is called a hot site, which means I maintain a separate building someplace else. Maybe it's, so many miles away. That has everything. It's got power and comms and HVAC and plus standby servers. It could be like when you replace the servers in the main location, you took the old ones and you just put them on a truck and you took them out to the site and you plugged them in. So they're all running, okay? Oh, well, maybe not on. They could be turned off, but the servers are physically there. The power is there. Everything. Okay. And you could, if you wanted to, have it powered up, and this is the place that would automatically replicate the database stuff, right? The things that change. It has the exact same, tape drive or whatever technology you're using for backup, at this site and that site. So you could go grab, the tapes, or I'm using tapes, but a lot of people don't use tapes, and grab the tapes and just go to the other machine, do a other site, do a thing. So a hot site means I basically have a duplicate server room. Okay, now that's kind of expensive. First of all, you have to maintain the site. You have to pay money for the utilities and rent and all the rest of that stuff. And if there's servers involved, maybe there's a fee associated with that. So database shadowing is a cool technique. Obviously, this is kind of expensive. A warm site is a site that basically just has the hardware, okay? It's just about a room with the hardware on there, but there's no replication going on. And if I show up at the warm site, I'm going to have to start over from scratch with, loading the servers from backup. So a hot site, typically the recovery time is relatively low. It could be almost instantaneously, depending on if the only thing you had going on was the database. Well, then you just, switch over to the other site and, the web services come up and everything comes up. A warm site would have to be, I jump in a truck, I drive over there, I load the backup. So we're talking hours rather than minutes, okay? And then a cold site is just a room that's got all the power and communication and, and air conditioning, but there's nothing there. So if the problem happened, I would have to disconnect the servers, throw them in a truck, drive to the other site and reconnect them and get the thing going. So that's a really long time. We're probably talking days. So minutes, hours, and days. So an empty room, that's cheap to maintain, right? But I'll have to haul stuff or buy new to populate the machines in there. And there's a shared use one called timeshare, where I have a leased facility. Maybe, it could be, maybe I have a trusted supplier or business partner, and maybe they have a secure room someplace, and you go, hey, would you mind? I'll pay you a fee, and we can share this disaster recovery site, right? A warm site or a hot site. They go, sure, it'll cost you this amount of money. That kind of makes sense. If you're a junior partner in something, but your data is not only critical to you, but it's also critical to your partner, maybe they would agree to having you, be a tenant in their hot site. Okay, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark, as usual.